kind of unusual because it's like we're introducing ourselves to each other, but we obviously know each other quite well. But just to say that I'm James, I'm the producer for our HMP Grendon, which effectively means I manage the whole project, from things like building partnerships with the likes of the Cursler Trust and the National Criminal Justice Arts Alliance, to writing the public programme, to doing all the more boring things like managing budgets and scheduling and stuff like that. And then Dean, do you want to say?
Yeah, so my name's Dean Kelland and I'm the artist in residence at HMP Grendon. So it's my job really to respond to my experiences there in terms of my own practice, and then also to support the practice of the residents. Yeah.
And you work at the University of Wolverhampton as well?
Yes, so I'm also the course leader for the MA Art Design by Research and the MA Fine Art at the University of Wolverhampton as well.
Cool. And so that's us introduced. We need to say a few things. This is something that the head of learning at Ikon always reminds me of, that we need to mention terminology and a bit about the prison at the beginning of anything we do, because we fall into using terminology that is not standard across the prison system. So it's probably important to say, to start with, that HMP Grendon is a Cat B prison, and it works as a therapeutic prison as well. So the wings are effectively something called democratic therapeutic communities, and they operate group-based therapy. So the idea there is that by encouraging personal responsibility and social participation and things like that within the prison, there is then a reduction in reoffending, and all of that happens through things like psychodrama, art therapy, psychotherapy. So it's a very unique prison. It's the only prison of its kind. But we will refer to the wings as communities, although that's kind of interchangeable. But what we always do as well is a Grendon thing is that prisoners are referred to as residents, and we don't usually slip on that. So yeah, I mean, with all of that in mind, it's quite a unique setting for an artist residency. So Dean, what were your first impressions of working at Grendon, then rewinding to when the project started, which was August last year?
Yeah, I mean, it seems quite a long time ago now, and I guess it might be worth mentioning the build up to August as well, because August was kind of my official start. But prior to that, I'd only visited the prison a handful of times. So the first time I went was actually to look at a showcase of the residents' work, and that was held in the conference centre, which is within the grounds of Grendon. But it's a slightly, in hindsight, it's a slightly different experience, both architecturally and in terms of the feel of it to the actual setting that you go to on the wings and in the actual buildings themselves. The conference centre tends to be where events with invited members of the public is housed.
And it's removed from the main building of the prison.
Yeah, it's slightly aside from it, isn't it? And so that was my first experience of it, and that was kind of a really interesting thing. I hadn't been to a prison at all, let alone a Category B prison prior to that. And you know, like anybody else, you have reservations and you think, what is this going to be like? And you don't quite know what to expect. And I mean, you know, you go through the main gate, security is security, you know, and you go through that process. But I think probably what I expected was, I don't know, I had in my mind a vision that you know, the residents might be distinguishable from the guests. Mm-hmm. I thought they might come in to the conference centre at a different time. You know, I didn't know what the security staff would be like around the residents. So there was all those kind of natural questions when you've never been to a place like that before, kind of going around in my mind. My first thought was for a cup of tea, and that was on offer. So I headed for the tea, and I bumped into somebody literally as I was kind of heading to the queue, and I stepped back and I apologised, and I said, "Oh, you know, after you." And he kind of smiled and said, "Oh, don't worry, I'm not in any rush. I'm not going anywhere." And I kind of realised in that moment that actually the residents were in and amongst us, and they were not kind of distinguishable necessarily until you actually started studying the room. And so that those kind of initial barriers were broken down quite quickly, really, because it was just kind of, oh, all right. And I had a really nice chat with this guy while I was queuing for my tea, and you know, and we talked about the work that he got on display and those kind of things. So the atmosphere, or my sense of what it was like in terms of the atmosphere, was kind of established quite quickly, and a few kind of reservations were kind of dismissed straight away, because the atmosphere was such a positive and kind of, it's odd to use terms, isn't it? And I know you and I, we've talked about this before. So when I say it's a relaxed atmosphere, it's a relaxed atmosphere for a Category B prison, if that kind of makes sense. So I was at ease a lot quicker than I perhaps expected. And then following that day, obviously there was the application process for the residency, and then I was, you know, thankfully invited for an interview. And again, all I'd got was the conference centre in my mind, and so I didn't really, I hadn't seen the rest of Grendon, and I didn't know where the interviews would be. And so I again was kind of quite uncertain about, well, what's it going to be like? It could be in the conference centre again. But actually, I was taken through wings, and, you know, was kind of just walking in and amongst the residents and kind of having very kind of brief conversations with them as I was kind of taken to the space for the interview. And the first thing that happened was that I was interviewed by a panel of residents, which was a really interesting thing and a really interesting conversation that I had with them. And then there was kind of a little bit of a mix up with the timing. So I was meant to go straight into the main interview, but I ended up kind of standing in one of the corridors, talking to one of the residents for probably about half an hour. And we just talked about his work and the kind of things that he liked painting, and yeah, that kind of notion of a relaxed environment. It was just it's hard to express other than I think I've always been at ease in the environment, and that's down partly, I think, to the notion of community and the respect for that community that the staff and the residents have. So yeah, it's an interesting environment. I think your question was about what's it like on the wings, wasn't it? I can't remember.
No, it wasn't. It was just about your first impressions of.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess
your first experiences on the wings were probably, I mean, other than when you were interviewed, the first time you spent a lengthier amount of time on the wings would have been in handover with the former artist in residence.
Yeah, so I was lucky enough to have a period of time where Edmund Clark, the previous um, artist in residence, did a handover. So, um, and I remember really distinctly because it's a fond memory I have in my mind. The architecturally, the spaces are, you know, the ceilings are low, and it's quite tight spaces.
I mean, that came out of Edmund's residency in the work. You know, he made a piece of work called 1.98 meters squared, which is the size of a cell. So 6'6" by 6'6".
Yeah. And I think that when I first went onto the wing, so I went into one of the community rooms, and it was one of the smaller community rooms. And you know, and you think to yourself, I think when you first look round, you go, okay, there's bars. You know, this is quite a small space. It's quite low lit. You know, and you're kind of thinking, this is an interesting space. But as soon as the residents came in with their work and started talking about their work, that's what took over, and it just became a conversation and a dialogue about some of the things that they're interested in, and I remember it fondly because it kind of instigated the first thoughts about the work that I wanted to make. There's one particular conversation I had which kind of triggered some things that I'd been thinking about, not just for Grendon, but a long time ago as well, in terms of work that I might make. And I thought, oh, okay, there's some connections here, and there's some threads that I can immediately pick up. So I don't know if you want me to mention that particular conversation or.
Yeah, you can do. Yeah, there were a couple of specific conversations. Go for that, and then I'll ask you about a more challenging interaction that we had with one of the residents.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, one of the residents on the C wing was my first experience of a wing meeting, and you know, and how that took place. And you know, we'd spent a good hour or so kind of talking, and one of the residents said, "Oh, can I show you another painting I'm working on? I'll just go and grab it." And he came in with this fairly sizable portrait of Elvis Presley, and my immediate question to him was, you know, why Elvis? Are you a big fan? And he went, well, no, not really. He said, but, you know, it's Elvis, isn't it? And Elvis is the man. And I kind of thought, that's an interesting conversation. And the reason it kind of resonated is because, as you know, I kind of work in sketchbooks. And I'm kind of very focused in the sketchbooks. But every now and again, I'll make note of an idea that I can't quite work out at the time. But I leave it there as a thought, and I leave it there as an idea, and it's something that then I might go back to in 6 months' time or a year's time, or I might never go back to. But probably about 10 years ago, I kind of thought it'd be really interesting to make a piece of work about Elvis impersonators, and I got a few notes about that. And as soon as this resident kind of said that line, you know, Elvis is the man. And I kind of thought, okay, there's something interesting here about kind of, you know, ideals, masculine ideals. And that could be something I could start to pick up on and kind of think about in terms of those ideas I had about Elvis impersonators. So it just kind of sparked and reignited something that I kind of had a thought about a long time ago, and that then kind of fed in neatly with another conversation then I had with the therapist a little bit later on. So it was a really important moment, actually, that handover evening, that first experience, because it kind of really completely put me at ease in the environment, which I kind of expected anyway, because of how I'd been received already by the residents. But it also helped me to start to think about how I might respond, in terms of my work.
So moving on to that early conversation with one of the therapists, I remember being sat in her office actually, and I remember quite clearly this conversation. How did that interaction inform your work to this point? And bearing in mind, I mean, talking about Elvis, one of the conversations that we've had a lot with the men is not only about the idea of him being this ideal male figure, but also in his later life being seen as quite a flawed figure as well.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the things that the residents have really connected to. But I mean, that initial, so like I do, I kind of work up ideas in the sketchbook, and I think at that stage, and I mean, I've got the sketchbook here actually. But that at that early stage, I'd kind of only done a few pages and really started to kind of ask questions and start to think about how this might work. And I'll show my sketchbook to anybody as well. So I carry it with me so that I can just go, actually, this is what I'm doing. And we've been in, like you say, that meeting with the drama therapist.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to her, could I just share a few initial ideas with you and show her the work? And her response was, well, Elvis doesn't mean anything to the majority of the residents. And, she referred to her age and said, look, Elvis meant something to me. And she said, but, the demographic of the residents means that you need to find a more contemporary reference, and you need to find someone that does the same things, but is more familiar to the residents. And that was a fair enough comment. And that those are the kind of conversations you need to have. So I kind of dug around a little bit, and I decided that maybe David Beckham, particularly since kind of football, in that particular conversation, I was kind of told that, football has a great currency amongst a number of the residents. So, maybe that's something you could look at. So I decided that maybe David Beckham was the figure to kind of focus on. And so I did a few tests with David Beckham. And then, I mean, one of the important things that we've done is, whilst I work in sketchbooks, whenever I've done a residency, I like to surround myself with the ideas as well. It's kind of like making what's happening in the sketchbook loud, if that makes sense. It's kind of thinking out loud. So I've always kind of had a designated space where I've been able to kind of take ideas from the sketchbook, put experiments up on the wall, so that you're constantly able to kind of think through and pick up what's going on in the work. But more importantly, it means any visitors to the space can do that, and it's a really important thing, I think, at Grendon. And so the residents would come in and see the work that I was kind of putting up on the wall, and it was really interesting, the responses that I was getting, because almost all of the residents, I can't think of any that haven't actually were universally dismissive of the idea of David Beckham as an ideal male, which is interesting in itself. But they all qualified that by saying, you know, kind of repeating that first statement that, you know, Elvis, you know, I'm not a fan, but Elvis, you know, he's a man. He's the proper man. He's the real deal. You know, and you're getting kind of comments like that, and it kind of really confirmed and clarified some of the things that I was thinking about. And as you rightly said, we'd have conversations about the status of Elvis as this kind of idealized, beautiful male form. And we'd then also have conversations about that, you know, he also entered into a cycle of failure himself, you know, and it's interesting that, you know, he holds both of those masks within, you know, his lifetime. And so I think immediately the process of kind of just testing Elvis against another figure, in this case David Beckham, really established that, yeah, Elvis is the man. He's the right one to kind of be focusing on, you know.
I remember we had a very unusual day when we found out quite suddenly that there's actually an Elvis impersonator in Grendon as well.
That was a very unusual experience. Yeah. The fact that he was introduced to us as Grendon's Elvis impersonator, just like as if, you know, every prison has an Elvis impersonator. It was so kind of matter of fact. Oh, you want to talk to this guy? It was such a strange day, that was, because of course we were told about him as we were talking about the work on the wall. We were kind of told about him, and then later in the afternoon he kind of burst into the office singing Viva Las Vegas, and it just, I remember turning to you and saying, this, people wouldn't believe this, and people, you know, you couldn't write our day today, you know. And of course, and we never saw it actually, but he'd made his own costume as well. And we never got to see that.
No, and he left.
That particular residence moved on now as well. So, I mean, what's quite nice is that, you know, Grendon had an Elvis impersonator, and I think through the work, I'd like to increase that number. I'd like the work to show that there's a whole prison full of Elvis impersonators, actually.
And we had another conversation early on with one of the other therapists, who's actually our supervisor, Joe Augustus, who's been amazing. We talked to her a lot about masks and about certain psychoanalytical theories. And I think those conversations have informed your work to this point as well.
Yeah, I mean, she's been fantastic support, hasn't she? And I mean, it was twofold for me. And one of the things that I was aware of from Edmund's work was that you were essentially making work about the residents. But for obvious reasons, the residents can't be identifiable in the work. So I'm kind of thinking about Elvis impersonators, and then just from a practical reason, it felt right to start looking at masks. And because it solves that problem, whatever the work ends up being. And I mean, at this stage, you know, I'd like it to include the residents. I don't know, you know, it's still growing, it's still kind of taking place. But it solved that practical problem initially. But then, of course, as you say, from a psychoanalytical perspective, then the notion of masks and masking identities is something that the residents undertake as part of their therapy. So there was a convergent kind of line of thought there as well, that okay, this solves a practical problem potentially, but not only that, it deals with a very kind of important aspect of what the residents experience in terms of their therapy. And I mean, that's a really kind of important thing. And just going back to kind of the space that we've set up and kind of putting the work up on the walls for the residents to respond to, it's critical, I think, in this particular instance, because their response to that work comes through the lens of therapy. You know, they see things in the work with great clarity, because they're looking at something that they can immediately relate their experiences of therapy to, and that informs me, and that helps me make decisions about the work. And so all of that has kind of, you know, it's been really interesting to see those threads just kind of starting to tease threads out that then suddenly start to combine and start to converge, and the, you know, the level of dialogue is incredible with the residents. I mean, the last day we were there before the lockdown, one of the residents gave me 2 references. One was a psychoanalytical text, and one was a philosophical text, both of which I had no previous experience of looking at. And he you know, he'd gone to the trouble of saying, "Oh, this chapter here is really useful for you with what you're thinking about." So the engagement has been, you know, really really great. You know, it's just and more than I could have expected. You know, and you know, when you speak to people outside who haven't got experience of spending time with offenders, you know, I think there are a lot of preconceptions, natural preconceptions. But you know, the level of dialogue and analysis that's taking place is just mind blowing, really. I don't know if you feel the same, because you're in the same space and you hear some of the things that the residents kind of talking about. And I think if you'd have said to me beforehand, you'll be talking about Michel Foucault on the afternoons, I don't know if I'd have believed you. And I mean, that's my kind of prejudice and preconception coming to it. But you know, I mean, I don't know how you feel, James.
Yeah, I think I mean, my next question was about space, actually. I mean, we divide our time really between the wings and the studio. The studio's in the education wing. And I mean, from day one, we've had an open door policy in that studio, and that's where you've been displaying your work on the walls, as well as working on your sketchbooks. And what that's really allowed you to do is have lengthy conversations with the men and get to know them on a level that wouldn't happen in a larger group setting on the wings. So by having people drop in 2s and 3s and, you know, borrow an art book or talk about Foucault, as you say, I mean, that space has been so valuable, and particularly was important at the beginning of the residency, I think. I mean, the next thing that will happen when we return after this lockdown is that we'll have a permanent workshop space to move into, which is almost complete now, regardless of everything that's happening at the moment with the lockdown. And I mean, it's really important to say that for the residents as well as for you, this residency is about art practice. So what are your ambitions for that workshop space then? Bearing in mind it will be like starting a new residency in a sense. It's going to change our format.
Yeah.
It's going to completely increase. It will pretty much treble our contact time with the men.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's one of the ambitions. So we've had to fit ourselves in and around aspects of their normal daily life, which understandably, you know, they're in therapy every day. They have work commitments. And I think what's worked well is that we've been that space where they can drop in during breaks, or they know they've got a bit of time put aside. You know, we even had one of the residents, if you remember, who was kind of working kind of as quickly as he could and through his lunch, so that he could finish early and come and spend a couple of hours with us to talk about his work and talk about what we're doing. And so I think it worked well from that sense. But the idea then was, you know, in the sense that I've got a space there that I can work, you know, if we want to raise the ambitions for their ability to make and you know, engage with contemporary art practice, then they too need a space. And that's where the initial thought came from. And in a sense, we did a series of workshops that I think, I don't know how you feel, but I think it reinforced the notion that if we could get the residents their own space, excuse me, their own workshop space, then their output is just going to grow and grow and grow. And it also gives us the opportunity to offer them a broader range of experiences in terms of how they might make work. And I know, you know, one of the things that is a feature, understandably so, of I guess what's termed prison art, is that they kind of only really paint. That's really the majority of the work is paint.
Yeah, I mean, you see that in submissions to the Koestler Awards every year. They get thousands of paintings from the 7,000 or 8,000 works that go in every year. And yet the things that we were interested in at the beginning, you know, sketchbooks, bookbinding, printmaking, there would be hundreds rather than thousands of submissions, if that.
Yeah. And so I think we, you know, that idea of them having ownership of a space where they can produce in a wide range of activities was really the ambition, you know. It's exciting to think about that. And we did a series of workshops, and we were really lucky that we got Simon Harris, who's a master printmaker, and Simon kindly agreed to come and do some workshops, and we did some dry point etching, and then we printed, and it, you know, it a little bit on the seat of our pants. You know, we got a printing press, but we had to take a host wing, you know, and there were times where, you know, you or I were running to sinks to get trays filled so that we could soak paper, and then kind of, you know, so but it was brilliant. And what it kind of opened up for the residents was amazing. A completely different way of working, a different way of making images, a different process, and they were so engaged with it. And you know, and Simon said that to me after the final session. He said, I just can't believe how engaged and how, you know, how excited they all were and the energy they put into that.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, and they came up with some great work as well, which was really nice. And I think that kind of proved to us that there was the hunger there with the residents. And you know, when we've got our own workshop, the press will be a permanent fixture.
Mm-hmm.
And it means they can come and work. You know, they can work more freely. So it's not just, oh look, we're doing this workshop on one night for 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they've got access to that, and so printmaking can be a thing that kind of grows there, as other things can. You know, bookbinding and you know different ways of making images, and you know, and opening them up to kind of what contemporary art can be. You know, and I think that's just, if at the end of this residency, you know, we walk away from it and they have a designated workshop space and they can make work in a whole range of different ways, that's an amazing legacy, I think.
I mean, the workshops that we did were quite incredible, and I mean, the working in a prison, there is a lot to get through to get to that point where you do a workshop for 2 hours. And bearing in mind that we were taking a printing press that weighs a ton on a trolley down to the wings to set up in a space that's definitely not purpose built for a workshop, for a wet workshop. So, you know, we were rolling up a large carpet and the men were helping us set out tables and on and on. But yeah, it was, I mean, there was a great deal of risk assessing to be able to do something as unusual as dry point etching. And but also the men have to go through their process of getting backing a month ahead at least of an event that could then, you know, you turn up on the night and maybe your art rep hasn't booked the room and it's set up for group therapy the next day, which actually happened. And then you end up doing your workshop in the canteen, which actually might have been better suited because it's got floors that can be wet. But you know, there's so much riding on, and there's so much trust from the prison as well. For the new artist in residence and me to rock up and facilitate a workshop with another artist. I think,
I mean, that one workshop, sorry to interrupt, but that printmaking workshop, I think I wanted to do it more or less as soon as we walked in. I was kind of saying, oh, you know, we should do printmaking. And, you know, then the process of getting the press ordered and through security, having to go to risk assessment meetings with a number of different members of staff to kind of talk about, you know, how the press works, how the etching tools work, the kind of level of security we need with those and the processes. I think there was a point where we were kind of thinking, it's been a long time we've been talking about these workshops, and I know that because we've got the press sitting in our space, the residents themselves were looking at the press, and I think they were probably thinking, is this ever going to happen? Because that press is sitting there and it's, you know, but like you say, that's working in a prison, and those processes have to take place. And you know, and I think we deliberately chose a really tricky one as the first workshop, because I think we felt that, look, if we can jump through all the hoops and adhere to all the processes required to get this done, then everything else will be easy. You know, any other workshops that we want to try and instigate, they'll be relatively easy compared to this. So I think we set ourselves up for a long haul to begin with, but it paid off, I think. You know,
definitely.
The engagement and the work that they produced was fantastic as a result. You know.
Yeah, it was a difficult one to start with. But it was about learning for us as much as anything. And going back to that point, that neither of us have worked in a criminal justice setting before. And by choosing such a difficult workshop, and one that involves a sharp tool which needs to be risk assessed, and a large, I mean, metal and glass isn't allowed in the prison, and we've got a large printmaking press that's obviously been signed off and is fine, but is made largely out of metal. I mean, that was it did take some time to get the press in there, but I think the thing that's really helped us is that the governor, Becky Hayward, has been really supportive, and we will always say, well, we'd like to do this, and then she'll probably say, that's fine, you need to do X, Y, Z, and then it's, you know, there are a lot of staff, there are hundreds of staff in prisons, and then for us it's finding the right ones, and then if we're using a host wing, there's specific staff on that wing that we have to go through, you know. So we would effectively, to set up the same workshop on a different wing, we then have to go through the whole process again, because it operates as its own community, has its own rules to an extent.
And I mean, Becky's brilliant because she's one of those people that always looks at things as, how can we do this, rather than how can we not do this. And she always looks at things from, this will benefit the residents, rather than, well, what benefit is this going to be to the residents? You know, she's so positive, and she always looks for a way to make things happen. You know, as was the case with the space. You know, when we walked into her office and said we want the residents to have their own art space, you know.
They offered us 4.
They offered us 4 straight away, and she said, "Oh yeah, I've got a few spaces actually," you know. And she's been fantastic in kind of helping us realise some of the things that we want to do.
It's really exciting that we'll be going back to that as well. I mean, it will be like our own mini art school, which will be so good for the men, you know, and it will mean that we've kind of naturally fallen into this idea where we'll bring in other artists, experts in their fields, to facilitate workshops with the men. And you know, with not entirely, but we are paying attention to mediums and materials that are difficult to work with in prisons and don't usually happen. But all of that will be so much easier when we have our own space. You know, we won't be moving a printing press on a trolley to a wing to set up in pretty rapid time for a 2-hour workshop, you know. So it's exciting that we'll go back to that.
I think so,
Now that we're in lockdown, we're still able to support the prison remotely. You know, I'm doing a great deal of materials orders, and the wing therapists in particular, and the other staff and management at Grendon have been amazing. And you know, I mean, they're obviously happy for us to be giving materials to the men, because they're you know, literally locked up in their cells 23 hours a day. So, you know, having a creative output or practice is really important to them at the moment, because they have so much time in a very small space. But I mean, how have you found lockdown so far? I mean, we should acknowledge it, seeing as that's the reason we're doing this talk.
I mean, do you mean in terms of Grendon or general? I mean, in terms of Grendon, it's been, you know, like most people experience. I mean, it's been really frustrating not to be there, and not to kind of be maintaining that contact in the way that it was happening in the space. It's been frustrating, and you know, I can only imagine what it's like for the residents to be confined to such small spaces, and not have access to kind of the things that we were doing while we were there. Having said that, of course, you've been brilliant with the materials. making sure that they've got those. We've set them a brief. I think we're going to be sending them another brief as well, just to try and keep them thinking and working about, thinking and producing work kind of around what's happening to them at the moment, to a lesser degree. Obviously it's happening to everybody at the moment, that there's a certain level of incarceration. Of course, they're used to that, but it's kind of been increased for them in terms of, the small space that they sleep in is now the space that they live in as well, so it's been a kind of strange period. And I mean, one of the things that was really important, going right back to the beginning of our conversation, the open door policy that we'd set up with our space, the conversations and the relationships that we built through those conversations were really important. And there's always a kind of slight fear that if we're not careful and we don't keep a presence there, that some of that will be lost slightly. I think that's kind of crossed my mind, and that really kind of having to work very hard to kind of re-establish those relationships when we return. Yeah, I'm just desperate to get back, really. But then this is the situation that
we have to deal with it and carry on.
Yeah,
I mean, as we came into lockdown and quite quickly realized that we wouldn't be able to work there, and would be working from home for the foreseeable future, we were getting close to you shooting film and turning your sketchbooks into something more tangible, maybe less tangible than a sketchbook actually. But so you were thinking about 16 mil.
Yeah. So what I'd kind of started to do, I mean, in the same way we talked about the workshops, when you want to make a piece of work, there's a lot of things that you have to deal with, especially if you want to take cameras into Grendon, any prison really. So we were kind of braced and had started having conversations, with Becky. We had a meeting with Becky where I outlined what my intentions were, and she was again really positive, and she's going, right, that's fine, this is what you need to do, these are the people you need to speak to. So we were starting to get to that point. What I'd done, knowing that, so like on previous residencies, I'd work out an idea in the sketchbook and then go and do it. Particularly if it was the space, it was in response to the space, or it required some rehearsal, I'd just go and do it, and then I could kind of print that stuff off, print stills, or review some of the moving footage and get that into the sketchbook, and then it kind of grows, and you kind of go, oh, okay, I can start to see what's happening there. Okay, I'm going to go and reshoot that this afternoon. And so that's kind of how I'd worked on previous residencies. I was perfectly aware from the outset that I wasn't going to be in a position to do that. I wasn't going to be able to say, James, I'm just nipping to C-Wing and I'm just going to do a quick film and then I'll get that in the sketchbook. So, I mean, one of the things that I did do, I actually used the School of Art, and I used the corridors at the School of Art to work out a few ideas. So it kind of became a rehearsal. And that's one way I navigated around not being able to just kind of shoot some test material within the prison. And it gave me a kind of visual reference for how things might work, and it kind of helped me in terms of kind of performance side of it that I wanted to work with. So I'd kind of done some test runs that were in the sketchbook. But having done a couple of those and kind of worked it through, I'd got to the point where I needed to do it in the prison. And we'd started to plan and prepare for that. And yeah, and I was excited about that. You know, and what I was really keen to do was get that initial footage and kind of show some rough cuts to the residents, to kind of move the dialogue on from, okay, this is what you've seen on the wall, and this is kind of one of the ideas I'm working with, for example, and kind of get that interaction going again, just with a later stage of the work. So I guess when we return, I mean, there'll be a lot to do with the workshop, but, you know, I'm really keen to get going as soon as possible. As soon as we get a return date, then I'm going to be keen to be making something as soon as possible. I mean, the other thing that, of course, we were right on the verge, literally, actually, the week of lockdown, we were due to screen Samuel Beckett's film, and also a couple of my previous films to the residents, and we'd set up an evening on one of the wings of the host wing.
And one of the residents had prepared a really nice introduction. Of course, we did this, so, you know, we were repeating the event from a public event that we did at Ikon.
Yeah, we did at Ikon,
February, where we read out that introduction. I suppose in Grendon, in the prison, that resident could have done his own introduction to the other men. And I mean,
I'd actually spoken to him and said, are you okay to introduce the film? Do you want to do the introduction? And he'd come to me actually the day of lockdown and said, I'm not going to read out the piece of writing I prepared. And he said, I'm just going to summarize some of those points and just kind of introduce it. So he'd kind of prepared. He was ready for it, and we've already talked about, we don't know what kind of social distancing measures will be in place. So I mean, I think we're prepared for the fact that we might not be able to go straight back in and say, right, we're having an evening where we're going to watch these films in the community room, because we might not be allowed to have any more than 10 people in a space at one time. We don't know, do we? I mean,
we always rely on the prison there. And I mean, prisons are great for rules. So whatever their rule is, we will follow. And they will have put something in place when we return. But I mean, we were talking yesterday about workshops and social distancing, and how we'll make that workshop space work with social distancing in mind, which is just something, it's another plan that we'll put together, another proposal to write to the governor, so that they know that we're thinking about everything. But we'll just have to roll with the punches as everybody else is. But hopefully we'll be back, you know, sooner rather than later.
And I mean, because of course the other thing we don't know is, you know, we've got a 3-year plan, and of course the longer this goes on, that starts to take a bite out of that 3-year plan, and so the sooner we get back the better, really.
Okay, unless there's anything else. I mean, that's exactly an hour. So
oh, is it?
Yeah. Okay. I guess we could leave it there.
Yeah, I mean, it's I mean, one of the things, I don't know whether you want to mention that one of the things we've done in lockdown is we've been working on a publication together. So I think we both, it's another thing we've been talking about over the period of time we've been at Grendon, and we probably, I don't know, I can't remember if we plan to do it this soon, but what the lockdown has done for us is given us the opportunity to kind of really focus and say, right, okay, can we actually do this and put a publication together? And I mean, Jonathan's been great. He's conducted an interview, which would be in the publication. You're writing a piece as an introduction to it. It's going to include the blog that I've been writing, the blog posts, something on Samuel Beckett's film, and excerpts from the sketchbook. So it's I guess it's kind of a summary of that first period prior to lockdown, isn't it? And that's been quite an exciting thing to work on.
Yeah, I think it's incredible that we've got to the point where we can produce something like that, when, you know, we've had 7-8 months of experience in the prison. You know, we're not really even close to a year yet, which will be August. So it's great that we have produced so much content that we could produce a really ambitious publication to document the first year, and then with the ambition to producing more publications as the 3 years go on, and as we approach the final year of the residency, which is 2022.
Yeah, it's exciting. I mean, I guess the only other thing we didn't mention was the show that we had at the residents' work, which was just a fantastic experience, wasn't it?
I mean, it made us so visible in the prison. You know, that was January, so we were kind of 6 months in at that point, and definitely getting to know everybody, particularly the residents. But like I say, there are hundreds of staff. There are 230 residents at Grendon, and we kind of changed the format from previous years in that we had that event in the main building in the gym, which meant that it's on one of the main corridors and it's visible to everybody in the prison. And we had hundreds of people show up over the 3 days, including the install and deinstall, which we did with a team of about 10 residents. And it was a great bonding experience for us. And it was good to show partners and our funders at the Motoshitsky Trust, as well as Ikon staff and your colleagues at the university, what we've been doing, what the ambition of the project is. And, you know, it was great that we had a part of the section of the wall just for the printmaking that we did with Simon.
I think the whole experience, it was really encouraging, and I think it gave the residents it gave them a sense of the ambition of the project as well, which I think, you know, they were so, you know, and I remember saying to you that I was worried, but they were so you know, elated by the experience that there might be a bit of a come down from it, because it was just such a wonderful experience for them all. And you know, and of course one of the residents has written an article about that event, and that will be in Inside Times. And
it should be in the May edition, so that should be coming out quite soon.
Real, so I guess that's us then, isn't it?
That's us in an hour.
That's what we do. All
right.
Thanks, James.
Thanks, Dean. Thanks.